Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Nick Cosgrove and I am back with this week's No Filter Q&A. This is the episode where I answer all questions related to diet, training, and supplementation that I've received over the last 7 days from our in-house clients, online clients, as well as a few of our online followers. Remember, if you have any questions related to your nutritional plan, workout program, supplements you are currently taking, not taking, or considering taking, please feel free to email me those questions at nick@foreverfitperformance.com, or you can DM me your questions on my Instagram at fitcosgrove_. Okay, let's get started with this week's no filter Q&A with question number one. Nick, how fast should I aim to lose weight? Well, the generic response that you're going to receive from many will be you should be aiming to lose about 2 pounds per week. However, I don't like to follow that formula, okay, because it's a generic formula, it's a generic protocol, it's a cookie cutter plan, okay, because if you take, for example, let's look at a man who's got 14% body fat, and that man wants to take his 14% body fat and bring it down to 10% body fat. On the scale, you're going to need to lose about 15, maybe 20 pounds, okay, to get down to that 10% body fat. If that man has also been weight training for years on end, they're going to be able to fast track their fat loss protocol, okay, because more muscle equates to more fat loss because you burn more calories in a rested state, the more muscle you have. We've talked about this in the past, okay? Whereas if you take someone who is at 40% body fat, another man, 40% body fat, and they want to bring their same body fat percentage down to that 10%, well, for them, losing anywhere from 2 to maybe even 4 pounds per week is more realistic because A, they have more fat to lose, and B, it's easier to lose weight when you have a lot of it to lose. And what I mean by that is for someone who is, let's say, morbidly obese, for that person to walk up a flight of stairs, they're going to have to exert so much energy just to do that. Whereas someone who is not morbidly obese, and let's say maybe they're a little bit overweight, they're going to have to exert some energy, but it won't be too much. And then you take someone who's super fit, like under 10% body fat for men, under 15% body fat for women, they go up that flight of stairs, no problem, but they're not going to be exerting as much energy. So therefore, they're not going to be losing as many calories. Okay. So I don't like these generic formulas that say everyone should be aiming for 2 pounds per week. Not true. And also, what do those pounds look like? Are we losing fat? Are we losing muscle? Are we losing water? Are we losing a combination of all three? Ideally, you just want to lose body fat. So therefore, the whole 2 pounds per week, that formula should be thrown out the window. Okay. So what I typically do with people I work with, I assess their physique. So I'll look at their physique and they'll say, someone's coming to me and says, I want to lose about 15, 20 pounds. And I'm looking at their physique. I'm like, you're already pretty lean. We can get you to lose 15 to 20 pounds and I can get you down in like 7 weeks. You can lose 2 pounds per week. Hell, you could even lose 3 pounds per week. All I have to do is starve you, give you endless amounts of cardio. You'll lose that weight, but it's not weight that we want to lose. You will lose body fat, you'll lose muscle, and you probably will lose some water weight as well. So if the goal is to lose strictly body fat, which should be the goal, why would anyone want to lose muscle? Why would anyone want to lose water? The goal should only to be lose body fat. In this scenario, I'll say to that person, if we do it the right way, we should be aiming for anywhere from half a pound to 1 pound per week. And I understand that doesn't look sexy on the scale. I get it. It's frustrating. Oh my God, I got to do all this work to only lose 1 pound per week. Right. But keep in mind, the weight that you're losing is body fat, and the weight that you're maintaining and perhaps even building is muscle. So if you're all about body composition, as in transforming your physique, trading fat for muscle, you shouldn't really care too much what the scale says. Rather than say, well, I want to lose 15, 20 pounds, that's nice on paper, but say, you know what? I want to lose 15 pounds of fat and I want to put on 15 pounds of muscle because that's going to look a lot better, right? So I always try to get my clients to think like that and not necessarily think of the number. Okay. Think more importantly is how do you want to look? How do you want your physique to look? How do you want to feel? Do you want to feel more energy throughout the day? Do you want to sleep better? Do you want to recover better? Do you want to have a better relationship with your partner, better sex life, more energy to go work out, right? Not constantly feeling tired, fatigued, constantly need stimulants, right? So all this correlates to more than just the number on the scale. Okay. So whenever I work with someone and they tell me, hey, I need to lose weight, I want them to be very clear with me as to what kind of weight they want to lose. Because when they start thinking like that and they start thinking, well, no, I want to lose fat. I'm like, okay. So let's forget about the scale and let's focus on losing fat and let's focus on building muscle and let's focus on preserving muscle and let's make sure that any nutritional plan, not diet, but any nutritional plan that we put you on is sustainable. Because if it's not sustainable, it's not going to be successful. And I know I've said this time and time again, but it's so true. I see so many people go on these fad diets and they lose all this weight, and then they put all the weight back on as soon as they come off the diet because the diet's not sustainable. And then they mess up their thyroid, they mess up their metabolism, they mess up their hormones. And I'm like, why would you do that? So if you do it correctly and you do it intelligently, you're going to not only is the nutritional plan you're following sustainable, but you're going to feel good, you're going to look good, your hormones are going to be balanced out throughout the day. You're not going to have all these energy fluctuations. You're not going to feel moody. You're not going to feel chronically fatigued. So you want to make sure that you structure a meal plan that makes sense for you and your lifestyle. But in my experience, the best way to do it is by putting together a plan that is sustainable and a plan that's realistic to follow, not just for a few weeks, a few months, but for life. Okay. So to answer that question, I'm not going to give you the generic answer that most people will and say you should be aiming for 2 pounds per week because I feel it really depends on the individual, how much weight the individual has to lose, and how much time that person is actually giving themselves. A, in the gym, okay, B, with their cardio, okay, and C, with their nutritional plan. Because a lot of times people will follow a diet for 3 or 4 days and then they'll go out and they'll binge drink or they'll go out for restaurants and eat whatever they want. So you've got to be realistic. And if you know that you can stay on track with your diet for 7 days a week, great. But if you know, like, hey, you know what? No, I travel a lot. I got to go to meetings. If I can get clean eating for like at least 70% of the time, that's more realistic for me. Great, no problem. We can work with that. But as long as you're being honest with me, I can put together a program that's going to work for you. You might not lose the amount of body fat that you want to lose in the least amount of time because we're taking a little detour, but you will lose it. Okay. Whereas someone who's dialed in for 7 days a week, obviously they're going to lose the body fat more quicker, right? Or more quickly, I should say. Same thing with someone who's in the gym 2 days a week versus someone who's in the gym 6 days a week. That person who's in the gym 6 days a week, if they're training correctly, is going to see better results, put on more muscle with their physique. So you have to be realistic with what you are able to do, both inside the gym and inside the kitchen with your diet. All right. Okay. Next question. Nick, is it bad to eat late at night? Yes and no. Okay. So when it comes to putting on body fat, no. That is another dietary misconception. Back when I was first starting off as a trainer, the biggest thing was no carbs after 6 p.m. And I used to follow that rule. I used to tell clients, I'm like, oh yeah, you shouldn't eat carbs at night. And the reason for that was say, well, you're going to bed, you're going to be less active, and it's going to sit in your stomach, and you're going to start putting on body fat. And then the more I researched this, the more I realized is that a lot of people who have, let's say, desk jobs and are sitting at a computer all day, they're actually burning fewer calories sitting at that computer than they are sleeping. Yet they'll go out for big lunches or they'll have a big breakfast. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not like they're out there moving around all day, running around, going to workouts and jumping up and down on their desk. No, they're having a fairly sedentary lifestyle. So for these people, they're not burning more calories during the day than they are at night. So I've always found that what works for people is that if it works better for you to eat late at night, like I have a lot of people I work with who don't get their first meal until 10, maybe 11 o'clock in the morning. That's fine. Their last meal comes around maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night. And you know what? They still lose body fat. They still put on muscle because it works with their lifestyle. It works with their work schedule. It works with their training program. So you have to put in your meals with how it works for you. So that's where I say no. Now, where I say yes is where I find with what I should say is what I find with a lot of people who tend to eat late at night, it tends to disrupt their sleep. So if you have a big meal before you go to bed, let's say even if you have like a chicken and rice before you go to bed, problem is your body's digesting that food. So if you go to sleep, it's very hard to fall asleep, or maybe not just fall asleep, but to stay asleep and have a good sleep, a good REM sleep, because your body is not in a state of relaxation. It's digesting what you just eaten. So I always recommend to people, if they can, is try to space out your last meal at least an hour and a half, 2 hours before you go to bed. But it has nothing to do with fat gain. It has nothing to do with the whole carbohydrates at night are going to make you gain body fat because that's simply not true. It's not. Okay. And that's a myth that I think is slowly starting to die. Well, I hope it's starting to die. It's one that I remind clients all the time. It's not true. There's no science backing this. As long as you, let's say again, I talked about this last week, if you're following a 6 meal plan, as long as you get all those 6 meals within a 24-hour window, you should ideally be fine. Okay. So I always tend to, if I go to bed around, let's say 11 o'clock at night, my last meal is usually around 9 o'clock at night for me. Okay. One thing I do recommend though is that if you are finding that you're having a hard time falling asleep at night and you are someone who eats it late at night, try to front load your carbs at the beginning of the day. Again, not for fat loss purposes, but more so because if you front load your carbs at the beginning of the day and you tend to finish off your day with more fats and proteins, so maybe your last meal is like say protein shake and it's just 30 grams of whey isolate with a scoop of or a tablespoon of natural peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter. You have very little carbs in there, maybe like 3 or 5 grams of carbs, but it's mostly fat and protein. And I find that's a little bit easier for people to digest and go to sleep on. Okay. Because the carbohydrates take a little bit longer for the body to digest, just to break down. Okay. So that's where the problem is. Whereas fats, and I've talked about this before with fats, fats do take longer for the body to digest, but you're not going to a workout. Right. So that's why I don't recommend people have fats pre-workout. But before they go to sleep, that's fine because you're not being active. Right. So if you have fats like an hour and a half, 2 hours before you go to sleep, that should be okay. Okay. So as long as you don't overeat, you don't have to worry about weight gain. All right. So you have to look at your activity level and well, if you want to look at your caloric intake, you can. But as I mentioned last week on the channel, I don't count calories. I count macronutrient intake. And that's where I start to tweak and revise people's programs based on how much body fat they're losing or not losing on a weekly basis. All right. Okay. Nick, what's the best way to bulk without gaining too much fat? Don't bulk. I have talked about this one in the past too, so I won't go into too much detail, but I am not a fan of bulking or cutting or any of these ridiculous dieting fads and trends. I focus on if the goal is, in your case, you want to put on muscle. I assume if you're bulking, the goal is to put on muscle. The majority of the food you are eating should come from clean whole food sources. So when I talk about that, I mean lean proteins such as chicken breasts, turkey breasts, cod, tilapia, complex carbohydrates, quinoa, brown rice or white rice, yams, sweet potatoes, oatmeal, cream of rice, healthy fats, peanut butter, cashew butter, almond butter, extra virgin olive oil, omega-3 eggs, avocado, salmon. So the majority of the food you are consuming should come from whole food sources. And if you are not too concerned about putting on a little bit of body fat, you can have a cheat meal every day if you want something small. If you want to have a muffin, you want to have a piece of cake, you want to have a slice of pizza, I say go for it. That's fine because your goal is not to necessarily get your body fat down. And one thing too is you should be monitoring your physique and monitoring the scale. So whenever I was trying to put on muscle when I used to compete, I'd always keep a watchful eye on my physique and I would take photos, weekly photos just for myself. I wouldn't put them up on Instagram. I wasn't looking for validation from people. These were photos just for me to see how my physique was transforming on a weekly basis. And if I started to notice that I was putting on too much body fat, I'd scale down the carbs or scale down the fats, depending on what I was doing that on that week. Okay. I'm a big advocate of rotating macronutrients on a weekly basis. So depending on what I was doing, that's what I would lower. Okay. And that usually worked for me. And I do the same thing with clients I work with who are trying to put on muscle. So I just keep that watchful eye. The scale as well, we just keeping a watchful eye on that. If all of a sudden we see the scale going up by 5 or 6 pounds, that tells me we have to back off a little bit because if we're putting on that much weight in on a weekly basis, unless let's say you're a woman and you're on your period, there's very few people that are putting on 5 or 6 pounds a week. And if you're doing that, that tells me that a lot of that weight is water and fat. So we don't want to do that. Okay. We want to aim for that half a pound, maybe a pound a week if you're natural. Okay. Obviously, if you're on an anabolic steroid cycle, different story. You're going to be putting on more muscle. So it could be quite realistic to put on 3 to 5 pounds of muscle every few weeks, depending on how long you've been on steroids for, what point you are on your steroid cycle, and so on. Okay. Your fitness, your training background, whatever it may be. But for most people, I strongly advise people not to try and bulk. Okay. So you don't want to just eat everything because what happens when you eat everything, you're going to look like you eat everything. And the weight is not going to go necessarily where you want it to go. It's not going to necessarily go on your biceps or your delts or your pecs. A lot of it's going to go on your midsection. So you got to watch that. It's that fine line. It's the same thing I say to people who are trying to lose weight. The goal should only be to lose body fat, not muscle. When you're trying to put on weight, the goal should only be to put on muscle, not body fat. Okay. Anyone can lose weight. Anyone can gain weight, but very few people can lose body fat while preserving and building muscle, and very few people can build and preserve muscle while losing body fat. That's where a completely different strategy has to be taken when you're putting together a nutritional plan. All right. Okay. Nick, what are good snacks for muscle gain? So I don't recommend snacking. I talked about this last week on the Q&A. I find that snacking leads to weight gain and not good weight gain. Okay. I like portion control, and snacking doesn't offer portion control. Snacking is usually just mindless eating, right? So what I typically do is if I'm working with someone whose goal is to build muscle, as in the last question, I will usually start that person off on 6 meals and sometimes even bring them up to 8 to 10 meals a day. But they're small meals. They're not big meals. Like these meals will take less than 10 minutes to eat. Okay. So again, no, they're small meals. So if you want to call them snacks, you can, but they're not snacks. They're still portioned out. So a small meal might be something like that 30 grams of whey isolate that I talked about in a previous question with 1 tablespoon of peanut butter. There's a meal right there. Okay. Another meal might be something like 30 grams or let's say half a cup of oats with 30 grams of whey isolate, another tablespoon of natural peanut butter, and now you've got complex carbs, lean proteins, healthy fats. Okay. Another meal might be something like 6 ounces of salmon, so you got your healthy fats there. 6 ounces of yams, you got your complex carbs there, and then you might want to throw in another healthy fat with extra virgin olive oil. Okay, so you got a fatty protein source from the salmon, a complex carbohydrate from the yams or sweet potatoes, and then you have a healthy fat from the extra virgin olive oil, tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. So I don't like snacks. So I can't tell you, oh yeah, go have this protein bar or go have this protein drink that you can buy at a store. I prefer people make their own protein shakes because then I know exactly what's going in them. Because if I'm putting together a nutritional plan, I tell you what's in them. And same thing with, I'm not a big fan of protein bars. If you're in a situation where you need to have a protein bar, let's say you're on the go and it's for convenience factor, Quest Nutrition, they make some pretty decent protein bars. And the only reason I like Quest Nutrition bars is because they're low in sugar. But I'm not a huge fan of them because there's a lot of artificial flavoring in there. And again, I'm a huge advocate. I'm a whole foods guy for most things, except for my greens. And I talked about that on an Instagram post. If you didn't check that out, go check that out about how I drink my greens instead of eating my greens. But for everything else, I'm a whole foods guy, always have been. And I find that works best for most people, whether their goal is to build muscle, lose fat, or a combination of the two. All right. Nick, should I take pre-workout? If you need it. Okay, so pre-workout's a funny thing. There is a crowd of people out there who are against pre-workouts. They say they're dangerous, that your risk of heart attack, stroke goes up, blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. Now, here's the thing. That is true if you have a heart condition. If you have a heart condition, you probably shouldn't be taking pre-workout because the combination of caffeine with beta-alanine and arginine, not a good combination for someone who has a heart condition. But if you don't have a heart condition, you should be fine. Okay. The only thing is, though, I would not recommend consuming a pre-workout with a cup of coffee. Okay, because that's a lot of caffeine coming in. So you want to keep the two separate. So if you're someone who works out first thing in the morning and you like to have a cup of coffee, that should be sufficient. However, if you're someone who tends to work out in the early afternoon, maybe in the early evening, and you're feeling that you need that extra kick, a pre-workout can be incredibly beneficial. If you are sensitive to stimulants, though, do not take a pre-workout. I know there's pre-workouts out there now that say they're stimulant free. Well, that defeats the purpose of a pre-workout. So to me, those are garbage. Like, why would you take a pre-workout if it's stimulant free, right? A pre-workout is there to like kind of get you going, give you that boost, the same boost you would get from a shot of espresso or maybe 2 or 3 cups of coffee. That's what a pre-workout is designed for. Most pre-workouts contain anywhere from 50 to 150 milligrams per one scoop. All right. So again, I don't think pre-workouts are bad necessarily, depending on what pre-workout you buy, because there are a lot of pre-workouts out there that are pure garbage and full of fillers. But if you get a good quality pre-workout, like, I take a product called C4, and I'm not trying to endorse this product, but it is a product I take. I find I like it. I take it, I notice it when I'm tired. It works. And I don't crash afterwards. A lot of pre-workouts, people tend to crash. So I find when you get a good quality pre-workout, one that's a little bit more expensive, they do work really well. Same thing with whey protein powders. You get a good whey protein powder, that's a little bit more expensive, it makes a world of difference. That means you're not on the toilet crapping it all out. A cheap whey protein powder can cause digestive issues, and you are on the toilet crapping it all out later. So same thing with a pre-workout. You want to make sure if you are taking any powders that they are of good quality. So read your ingredients. Any good pre-workout, in my opinion, is going to contain beta-alanine, arginine, and some caffeine. Okay. But again, if you have a heart condition, do not take a pre-workout. Okay. It's if you're sensitive to stimulants, do not take a pre-workout. And if you have a cup of coffee with your pre-workout, not a good idea. So keep those two far apart. Like if I have a cup of coffee in the morning, that means I'm not working out probably until 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So that cup of coffee is far gone out of my system by the time I take that pre-workout. Okay. But if I'm working out first thing in the morning and I have a cup of coffee, that's usually enough for me. Okay, so you have to figure out what works for you, but don't become over reliant on stimulants, even if you don't have a heart condition, because what happens then is you're going to burn out and it can get adrenal fatigue. Okay, so you don't want that to happen. You're going to have problems sleeping. I've known people who get addicted to things like ephedrine. Here in Canada, ephedrine is legal. You can actually buy it as a nasal congestion. In the US, it's not legal. So these are things I would not recommend taking at all, especially if you are someone who is sensitive to stimulants or, like I said, has high blood pressure or has a heart condition. All right. Okay. Nick, are greens powder worth the hype? Oh, yeah. So as I spoke about, greens powders, and again, this is my own personal opinion. A lot of them out there, garbage. But like anything, if you do your research, you buy a high quality product, again, they're usually a little bit more on the pricier side. They offer, in my experience, in my opinion, all the nutrients that you need, all the vitamins, all the minerals that you can get from whole greens. They can. And the problem, especially in today's age with our whole greens, is they're not as nutritious as you might think. Okay, so unless you're buying organic, they're really not. And you think a lot of these greens they have pesticides on them, and when they're coming from places where who knows the farms that they're on, who knows if they're washed properly. And at the end of the day, I find that greens powders, if you're getting a high quality one, can be really effective. Okay, and I did put up a Instagram post a few weeks ago about the greens powder that I take. And again, I'm not going to mention the name because I'm not trying to endorse the product itself. I'm just saying that that's what I take. It works for me, and it's something I use with a lot of my clients because, like me, they don't want to spend time chopping and cleaning and cutting their greens or having to go to the grocery store every 2 or 3 days to get more greens. It's just easier. Okay, like I do my Costco shopping once a month, and it's all my meats and all my carbs, and I keep them in the freezer, keep my carbs in the pantry, and that's easy. But the problem is with the um, was going to say the problem is when I'm looking for my vegetables, it's very difficult I find to find fresh vegetables, and that was a problem that I ran into. Was I when I would go to grocery stores, the vegetables I was looking at wasn't that really good, and unless it was organic, which is like twice as expensive, I'm like, it's not really offering me much benefits. So I did some research on a greens on a product that I'm using now, and it's offering all the vitamins, all the nutrients that I would get from organic greens at a quarter of the price. So it's a more cost-effective option. So are greens powder worth the hype? Most, in my opinion, from what I've researched, are not, because there's a lot of ones out there that are garbage. But the real good ones, and if you want the real good one, go to my Instagram. You'll see the post I'm referring to. They work well. Okay, you're going to pay for it, but you're also going to pay less in the long run because, again, one tub of greens powder that will last me a month easily. Okay, and I take that twice a day. All right. Okay, a few more questions here. Oh, two more questions. Sorry. Okay. Nick, is keto better than other diets? No. So keto diets are, I don't want to say that they're bad, but my problem with keto diets is they don't work long term. They're not a sustainable diet. Okay. Every single person I know that has done a ketosis diet, okay, also known as the Atkins diet back in the 90s, has put the weight back on once they come off that diet. So for those that don't know, a ketosis diet, the premises is fats, protein, no carbs, or very low carbs, indirect carbs, less than 20 grams of carbs per day. Okay. The only carbs you're most likely going to get are indirect sources, are fibrous carbohydrates from your greens, which, by the way, if you're having a greens powder, just to throw that out there, there's no carbs. Same. Okay. So But ketosis diets, the good thing about them is they allow people to feel fuller for a longer period of time because that's what fats do. So people who go on keto diets, they usually feel really good. And then they start to lose all this weight. And the reason they're losing a lot of weight is because they don't have any carbohydrates in their system, so they're not really holding on to water. If you talk to anyone who has ever done a ketosis diet, they'll tell you they pee a lot. And the reason they pee a lot is because with very little carbs in your body, there's nothing to hold that water in. So you're constantly going to the bathroom. Okay. So the weight you're losing, yes, you're losing body fat, but you're losing a lot of water weight. And another reason why ketosis diets are so popular is because people do feel really good on them because it actually does stabilize your insulin levels. The problem with carbohydrates, especially simple carbohydrates, they can spike your insulin levels, right? So sometimes you feel lots of energy, other times you feel no energy, sometimes you feel really tired, you need a cup of coffee, and that's usually from the carbohydrates. And especially, like I said, the simple carbohydrates cause this a lot. Whereas fats allow you to stay like this throughout the day. Right. So people usually feel good and they're losing weight. That's why ketosis diets are so popular, especially when people follow the what I call the bad version of the keto diets, which is like the Atkins version, which is bacon, butter. You have all this like unhealthy fats, trans fats. You have more saturated fats than you should have. I don't think that's good because I think that can lead to clogging arteries. But if you're following the clean ketosis plan, which is the one that I'm referring to, where you're having all healthy fats, you are going to lose weight. You are going to feel good. The problem is it's not a sustainable diet because there's going to come a time where you're going to want to go out to a restaurant and you're probably going to have some carbs. Or there's going to be a time where you're at a friend's place for dinner and maybe they're serving rice. So you can say, no, I'm on a keto diet. So it's very difficult to practice that diet year round. So it's not a diet that I recommend for the average person. Where I find ketosis diets work really well, though, are for people who are morbidly obese. So if I have someone coming to work with me, and let's say that person, and I've had this in the past, that person is, 300 plus pounds. If I put them on a keto diet just for the first 3 or 4 weeks, that person will easily lose 40, maybe even 50 pounds. I'm not kidding you. And the reason why I do this with those people is I want to regulate the insulin levels. I want to stabilize their blood sugar levels, and I want to help them drop a lot of water weight right now. Okay. Because if I help them drop a lot of water weight, when they get into the gym and they start moving more, because a lot of these people, they're not in the gym. So I start them off on a diet before I start them in the gym. Once they start getting into the gym now I start feeding them carbohydrates and they don't put on the weight because they're still quite overweight. But now what's happening is the carbohydrates will help replenish their glycogen storages, will give them strength to lift in the gym, which I find with ketosis diets, they don't work really well for that because it's very hard to replenish glycogen storages if you're on a keto diet. Okay. So, and I've done a keto diet. I did a keto diet back in, I think, 2010. And I did it for a bodybuilding competition and I felt very weak in the gym. And it's because I didn't have carbohydrates and I looked very flat on stage. So I realized that that wasn't a good diet for my body type. But again, I didn't know as much about dietary nutrition then as I do today. So that's really the only time I use ketosis diets. Rarely will I use them I'll use them sometimes in other situations if I'm working with a competitor who's getting ready for a bodybuilding show or fitness physique competition and they're a little behind schedule. But that's what I call like a last minute resort. If I have to, I'll do that, but rarely. Usually I keep people pretty even on their complex carbs, healthy fats, lean proteins, as long as they're continuously losing body fat while building and preserving muscle. Okay. So I'm not a huge advocate of keto diets. If you want to try one, go ahead. But just be aware that once you come off that diet, you're most likely going to put that weight back on again. Okay. I think I have one more question. Uh, okay. Nick, does the metabolism really slow down with age? No. And again, I did talk about this a few months ago, and I've mentioned in the past, there is no scientific data to suggest that the metabolism slows down with age. What happens is people tend to slow down with age. People become more sedentary. They look for convenience. So people sit rather than stand. People drive rather than walk. Okay. People go home, open a bottle of wine, sit on a couch, as opposed to go to the gym after work and get in a workout. So this is what happens over time, right? And people just get tired, right? So if you're someone though who's been exercising throughout your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, and now you're in your 60s and 70s, and technically you're labeled as a senior citizen, why would all of a sudden your metabolism just slow down? It doesn't. And the reason I know this is because I work with people. I have clients who are in their 60s and 70s who have been training since they were in their 20s. Okay. And before I was even born, they were still training. And these people still have great physiques and their metabolisms are not slowing down. Okay. It's the people who have been living a sedentary lifestyle. And now what happens as they get older, they're having all these health issues, whether it be arthritis, tendonitis, bursitis. They're having maybe someone's had a heart attack and now they're on a stint, whatever it may be. People may type 2 diabetic, whatever it may be, and that's because of their lifestyle that's happened. Sometimes it's genetics too, but a lot of times this is brought on through living in a sedentary lifestyle, these health issues. Now they're noticing as they get older, the weight's starting to accumulate on faster. Well, they're becoming more and more sedentary. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the metabolism. Um, I've worked with a few women over the years who, once they're going through menopause, and then the weight starts to fluctuate again. What I'll typically do though with a lot of women I work with in this scenario is I'll explain to them like, you have options here. You could go to an HRT clinic, you could talk to an HRT doctor, and you could potentially go on hormone replacement therapy. Now, not everyone wants to do that. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but it can help. And basically, what you're looking for is anything that's going to help you sleep better, recover better, and provide you with the energy to continue to live an active lifestyle. Because as soon as you take those things away, that's when the weight starts coming on. Okay. And now we know so much about hormones. And this is why I tell every single client, both men and women, do not go to a GP for hormone tests to test your testosterone levels or test your estrogen levels. Go to an HRT clinic. Okay. Yes, here in Canada, you have to go private. Pay for it. It's worth it. Okay. Because you're going to talk to a specialist that's going to help you balance out your hormones. So as you do get older, because as you do age, both men and women, our hormones change. Men after the age of 40, well, actually after the age of 25, your testosterone does start to decrease with age. Now, obviously there's exceptions to this rule because if you're someone who is training regularly like myself, I feel better now heading into my 40s than I did in my 20s. I have lots of energy. I feel very good. So I attribute that to working out. But if you're someone who doesn't work out that much, or maybe you're not as active, you might start to notice as a man that your testosterone levels are starting to drop. You have lower energy, maybe lower libido. Same thing for women. So it's important to get those levels checked. But I don't recommend doing it through a GP. And this is not to knock GPs. I think GPs are great, but they're general practitioners. They don't study hormones the same way a hormone specialist will. So again, in my experience, you're going to get way more out of visiting an HRT clinic and that someone can actually give you your results, but also not just hand you your results and say, here they are, here are your numbers. They're average, below average, or they're great. No, explain to you what's really going on with your body. And then you can make that decision. If you're a man, hey, should I go on TRT? If I'm a woman, should I go on HRT? That's up to you, okay? Because there are risks, but there are also benefits. So to answer this question about the metabolism, because I do get it a lot, it has nothing to do with your age. Okay. It has a lot to do with continuing to live a sedentary lifestyle and hormonal imbalances. But if you're living an active lifestyle and you are getting your hormones checked doesn't have to be on on a monthly basis, but at least an annual basis where you go and I get my blood work done once a year, always. Okay, just to see where my testosterone levels are at. I want to make sure that everything is looking good. I want to know what my hemoglobin levels are at. This is just data for me because if something's not good, I can get it right away. And okay, what do I need to do here? Okay, so do I need to supplement with something? Do I need to be taking more zinc? Do I need to maybe increase my omega 3s? Maybe decrease my vitamin D, whatever it may be. Okay, so this is why it's important to get blood work done. But again, if you're checking for your hormones, my recommendation, go to an HRT clinic. Okay. That's the best way to do it. And that will tell you the true story. And then you can get feedback and you can get recommendations from a specialist. Okay. Not from someone who maybe studied this portion of schooling for a month or two, someone who's actually gone to school to study hormones. It will make a world of difference. But again, age does not slow down your metabolism, period. Anyway, that's it for this week's No Filter Q&A. This episode will be going up on Monday, September the 29th. As a reminder, if you have any questions related to your nutritional plan, workout program, supplements you are currently taking, not taking, or considering taking, please feel free to email me those questions at nick@foreverfitperformance.com, or you can DM me your questions on my Instagram at @fitcosgrove_. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for supporting my YouTube channel, my online coaching business, as well as my in-house personal training business here in Vancouver, British Columbia. I truly do appreciate all the support and all the feedback that I receive from each and every single one of you. Thank you all again, and I will see you all next week. Bye for now.